Woodland owners of the southeast United States are a very diverse group. So we're going to look at family forest owners, though, in general. Before we talk specifically about forest owners, the family forest owners, let's look at ownership between public and private ownership. In looking at forest ownership in the southern U.S., only 13% of the forests are publicly owned. This leaves 87% in private ownership. And looking at that private ownership, you can see almost 29% of that is in corporate ownership, leaving the rest as family forest land owners. The largest ownership group, both in numbers of owners and acres, as I indicated earlier, was in family forest owners, which are a very diverse group of owners. These owners are spread over a large distribution of the size of land holdings, with the majority of them, almost 60%, owning less than 10 acres of forest land. But when you look at ownership patterns based on the size of holdings, almost 60% of the forested acres is in holdings of 100 acres or more. Knowing their reason for owning land is important for understanding how they manage their land. The majority of southern landowners own less than 100 acres of forest land, as I already indicated, with the majority of this forest land held in tracts larger than 100 acres. So it's important here to realize the rest of this presentation, when we're talking about family forest landowners and their ownership and reason for ownership and their concerns with ownership, we're talking about landowners that own 10 or more acres of forest land. The reason for owning forest lands, really it's the legacy, beauty, and wildlife if you look at the ownership categories on the left side of this graph. They own it for non-economic reasons, but for many they will need to harvest timber or generate income from other resources in order to cover the costs associated with land ownership. Their biggest concerns is to hold on to their land in order to pass it on to the family. The liability associated with being a landowner when it comes to people trespassing on their property, and the cost of owning property and the property taxes associated with land ownership. The majority of landowners are older landowners in age, and they're think about ways to pass their land on to the next generation, leaving it as a legacy. This will require planning and preparation. We know that many landowners have given little thought to planning on how they're going to pass their land on. So this is probably an excellent role for those that are in educating landowners about forest land management, such as cooperative extension. Based on when the survey was done, which was about 5 or 6 years ago, many owners have engaged in management of their property, with many acres being impacted by activities such as wildlife management and harvesting timber in the past. Their future activities for many of the owners is to engage in the management of the property, looking at activities such as wildlife management and harvesting timber or cutting trees when looking at ownership numbers. If you're looking at the area of land, it's wildlife management, but then the next higher category are those that are focused more on protecting the health of their forests, such as fuel reduction to protect it from wildfires. There are many landowners who will not seek advice or participate in management programs, but those that do make a huge impact on the number of acres affected. So let's look at how we can break up such a large group, which was known as family forest owners, into 4 basic categories based on the reasons why they own their land and the type of activities they might do. So the type of family forest landowners in the South can be divided into 4 basic groups that help us to understand the diversity of this land owner. These groups are working the lands, woodland retreat, supplemental income and uninvolved. The percentages here represent the total acres held in woodland acres of 10 or more acres in size. So for working the land landowners, they own 32% of the forest land that is 10 acres or more in size, followed by the woodland retreat owner owning 28%, followed by supplemental income owners at 19%, followed by the uninvolved at 14%. The working the land landowner is a pragmatic landowner who likes to work their land. They use their land both for financial and non-financial benefits. They enjoy being on the land and often have an emotional attachment to their woodlands. They feel confident in their ability to manage their land. The top reasons they own their land is for beauty and wildlife. Many of them are concerned, though, about keeping their land intact and others trespassing and causing vandalism on their property. Woodland retreat owners place high importance on the lifestyles and amenities in owning woodlands. They are less interested in deriving income from the land through harvesting and selling timber. Many of them have strong emotional bonds with their land, derive spiritual and emotional benefit from owning their land, and many see their lands as sanctuary for wildlife. Woodland retreat owners is the largest of the four categories and has the highest number of landowners who live on their land. Woodland retreat owners own their land for the beauty and natural aspects of the land, often thinking of their land as a sanctuary for wildlife. These landowners are often motivated to do management practices that benefit wildlife on their woodlands. Their concerns are more about keeping their lands intact and preventing trespassers. Anything that disrupts the enjoyment of their land, such as timber harvesting, will not likely appeal to them. The supplemental income landowner is a landowner that has good attitudes about managing their land, but are often not highly engaged in land management. These landowners are likely to cut trees and conduct other management activities to improve their woodlands. The supplemental income landowner, the top reasons they own land is to pass it on as a legacy to their heirs and as an investment. Many of them worry about holding their land together and paying property taxes. The uninvolved landowner has very little that motivates them about owning their land. Often they have inherited their land or it is a part of their agricultural operations. They do not feel passionate about the land and often perceive lack of time as a barrier to managing their land. The uninvolved landowner tends to own their land because it is a legacy. They've inherited from the previous generation and they find it as part of an investment strategy. Their major concerns in owning the land is paying property taxes and the impact trespassers may have on owning their land. So how engaged are these landowners? Most family forest owners have limited engagement in the management of their land. Working the lands, landowners the most engaged, with 21% of them being classified as highly engaged. The least engaged is the uninvolved landowner, with only 1% classified as being highly engaged. So when you begin to look at the activities these woodland owners do on their property and have done over the past 5 years, it's interesting to see that for a majority of these landowners, if you look at, for example, the uninvolved, the none of the above category indicates that they're not very active at all on their property and did not do any activities over the past 5 years. Working the landowners were more likely to cut timber and improve habitat in the past 5 years than any of the other categories. The woodland retreat owners were more likely to improve habitat and have participated in cost share programs, with the supplemental income landowners more likely to cut timber and equally be active in such things as management planning, improving habitat, and having cost share, but also not very involved with any of those type of activities. So what about their future plans? So these landowners, just as you can imagine, have many plans for their land, but for the majority of them, they want to see their forest land stay in forest. And those that tend to be less engaged in their forest, though, will most likely consider selling their timberland if offered the right price. So how do they want advice for as they participate in land ownership? Well, if you look at the majority of them, they all look for written material for advice. That's their main way of getting the information. They prefer that over other means such as talking to someone, conferences and workshops, or having somebody even come out and visit them on their land. And not very many of them use the internet. So, as you can see, for the majority of landowners, written material is the preferred. So who do they get their advice from? For many of them, they get their advice from state or local government. Most that are most engaged on their land are likely to seek that advice from agencies such as their state forest service, their cooperative extension service, the Natural Resource Conservation Service, or other state and local government entities that can provide them advice about forestry. Many of them also will seek advice from private consultants, with the supplemental income owners more likely to go to a private consultant than they are to seek out advice even from government agencies. And this isn't too surprising, since many of them are looking for income from their property, and a private consultant is going to be the best source of information to be able to help them with selling their timber. So in general, the majority of southern woodland owners own small forested acres in which timber production is not a major priority for them. The majority own their land from a legacy standpoint and for the beauty of their land. Their biggest concerns are related more to human interaction with the land, such as trespassing and vandalism, than those related to nature, such as climate change, insects and disease, or wildland fires. The majority of landowners are older and are beginning to consider passing their land on to the next generation. Looking at the past activities, many of them have been active on their land doing things such as wildlife habitat improvement, cutting firewood, or using their woodlands for grazing. In the future, many of the landowners will continue to improve their land, with the majority focused on wildlife habitat improvement.